Hello everyone, welcome to the Salesforce CPQ video series. Today we will be covering amendments and renewals. My name is Prashant Nambishan. I have over 17 years of work experience, predominantly in the Salesforce.com space. I hold 15 Salesforce certifications, including Application Architect and CPQ Specialist. Also, I am a Trailblazer mentor. Feel free to connect with me or follow me in the Twitter and LinkedIn details provided here. In today's session, we will go over the amendment process and the key considerations. We'll go through a live demo of how this works. We will do the same for renewals by going through the processes involved there, as well as the key considerations, and again, looking at an example. And lastly, we will also go through contracted pricing. So in our last video, we looked at a logical end to a particular sales cycle. We had an opportunity where there was a quote, the opportunity was moved to closed won, and it was contracted. Right? And you had subscription and asset records created for that particular opportunity, and we would have said that yes, we've closed the deal and the customer has paid. Now, of course, in any real life business scenario, changes are inevitable. And what could happen is, as you're going through that particular life cycle of a product, the customer may come and say that let's add another product, or let's change the quantity of something they've already purchased. So what they're looking for is making changes on the existing contract which is in play. And that process is called the amendment process. Salesforce CPQ natively has a robust mechanism to support the amendment process. Let's walk through how it works in Salesforce CPQ in a very simplified manner. So the starting point for that particular process is your contract or opportunity, which is closed won. You have the contract already created. You can go ahead and amend the contract. Now, when you amend the contract, what you're telling Salesforce CPQ is I've got a bunch of products, so typically subscription products, which are already in play, and I want to make some changes on those. Now, for that, what it will do is it will show you a screen where you have the same quote line editor with the same SKUs which are there on that particular contract. And it will be netted out with a zero value because the customer has already paid for it, but it will show you what are the current quantities which has been purchased. It's editable in the sense that you can make some changes to it. You can add new products, you can update the quantity and so on. There are some limitations and we will go through those. But essentially it allows you to make changes on the contract. When you update the quote line based on what is needed for the amendment and you save it, what you're doing is creating another opportunity and another quote. And this is the amendment opportunity and the associated amendment quote. These are separate from the original opportunity and original quote where the original contract was created against. But note that Salesforce CPQ does have a linkage between them, so all of this is traceable back. Now, of course, this opportunity and quote, of course, can be moved forward and contracted. And when you contract this, Salesforce CPQ recognizes that this is an amendment on the original contract, and what it does is it retains the same contract but with updated subscriptions, and also it updates the assets on the account. Also, it adds a co-terminated quote against that particular contract. The key thing again to note is that we're talking about the new quote or the amendment quote to be co-terminated with the same original contract. So this is how a very simplified process works in Salesforce CPQ. Let us now quickly look at an example in the trial org, and then we'll come back and look at some considerations when we are doing amendment in Salesforce. So we are in our trial org, and let me show you how we've set up a very simple example. Now this is a particular opportunity which is closed won and has been contracted out. So you'll see that there are products and also an associated contract with this. You can also see if I go to the quote and show you the quote lines in the quote line editor, there are two products which are there. One is an Apple Watch Series 5 and an Apple smartwatch warranty. It's again a quote which starts on the 1st of February 2021, and it is there for a subscription term of 12 months. Now this has been contracted. So if I go to the account, which is where the opportunity is tied, and I scroll down, you'll see that I have the contract in place with the same dates. I also have the Apple Watch Series 5 as an asset which has been added with quantity 1, and then I have a subscription product for the warranty. Again, all of this is set up based on how I quoted and contracted the previous opportunity. Now what we're going to do is look at how do we make some changes to this. So let me start by going to the contract itself. Now you can do an amendment either from the contract or from the opportunity. I'm taking the simple example of going through the contract. You will see that there is an amend button here. So let me click on this, and you will be shown what are the subscriptions which are there available for amendment. I'll click on amend. Now let's look at what we have here on the quote line 8 when we are looking at an amendment. The end date is always co-terminated with the contract. So in Salesforce CPQ, you really should not be changing the end date. You're working with a fixed end date when you're making amendments, because that is aligning to that particular contract. So that's a very important thing to note, that you're really not changing end date, but you do have the ability to change the start date. And start date changes typically would be, let's say, even though the contract starts on Feb 1st, 2021, and the customer comes in March and says, I want to add a new product. So you can actually change the start date to the appropriate date from where you want the changes to be effective. So let's take, say for this example, it is March 1st. You'll see that the existing subscriptions are already added. So the Apple smartwatch is there with quantity 1. I can see that I can edit the quantity if needed. However, I cannot do any discounting or make changes to the price. And the reason for this is, as part of the amendment process, Salesforce CPQ allows you to increase or decrease the quantity of the existing products there, but it will not allow you to change the price or the discounting. In essence, what it's telling you is that the pricing and discounting has already been negotiated and contracted with the customer, and those have to hold. You'll also note that if I scroll to the right, that the net total is showing as 0. And the reason is, we're making an amendment, so the initial quantity, even though it's quantity 1, that has already been paid for by the customer. Now, if I go and changes to 2, for example, and I hit calculate, you'll see that the price has now been updated. The net total is now showing $9.17. Now this price is only related to the additional 1 unit we've added. The original first unit has already been paid for. And again, as you would have noticed, that it's not $10, it is $9 and change. And the reason for that, of course, is we're starting from March. So we're only using it for 11 months. So one more thing which the Salesforce CPQ amendment process natively supports is proration. If you're changing the start date and you're purchasing extra SKUs only after a particular date, you will only be paying for that particular range based on how you applied your proration settings. So that's another change which you can do here. But again, as you notice, we don't have the ability to do any discounting because that has already been set as part of the original contract. One more thing you can do is add new products. So let me say that if the customer says in March they also want to purchase one of the Apple Watch Series 6, and let me select this, and let's say this is 2 units, and you will see that this is when I hit calculate, you will see that the customer is getting charged for the full 2 because this is net new. I can do some discounting if I want, because it's a net new addition. So this is what I've done here is the customer has come in March and asking for increase of the warranty by 1 unit as well as adding another watch. So that's the change the customer has requested for, and that's what we're trying to do as part of this amendment. Now, once I do this, I can hit save. And as soon as I hit save, you'll see that I've come to a particular new code. And this code is tied to an amendment for contract so-and-so. So what Salesforce CPQ has done in the background is created a net new opportunity, and it is also associated a quote with this. So if I click on the opportunity, you'll see that this quote which you're looking at is just the amendment. The amount for that is just the changes, and it's being created for that. And the products associated are also just the changes, the delta which we have looked for. So we've added the warranty, we've added a new watch, or 2 quantities of the new watch. Only those are showing up, so only 2 products. So that's how the first few steps of that amendment process work. Now, let's say as part of the discussion, we've talked to the customer, they're happy with this, we have negotiated everything, we are actually marking this opportunity as closed one. So I'm going to move this to closed one. And then, of course, as the next part of this, I'm saying let's go ahead and contract this amendment out as well. And let me save this. Now, as I save this, let's quickly go back to our account and see what has happened. We'll go to the related lists and scroll to our contract. So the first thing to see is that we still have only one contract. There's no change in the contract. And whatever the changes we made as part of the amendment are part of the same contract. So let me quickly click on the contract and go to the related list here and look at the subscriptions tied to this. And you'll see that there are 2 subscriptions, both for the same warranty, but the difference here is the start date, right? The second one which we added was only effective from March and goes till the 31st January 2022. So there is a proration of course applied, and there's a separate line to capture that change. So that's how an amendment is tied in with that original contract. So we had an original contract with just this, but now a new one has been added. And similarly, if I go back to the particular account, and let me go to the assets. You'll see that I have both the Series 5 and Series 6 added. Of course, originally as part of the original contract, we just had the first row. Now we have the second one also added. So this is how a typical amendment process in Salesforce CPQ is supported. So additionally, apart from this, Salesforce CPQ does offer you a few settings when you're doing your amendment. So let us quickly go to our contract once more and let me show you where those are. So I've just gone back to the account and let me navigate to the contract we have. Now, if I scroll down, you'll see that there is a section for Salesforce CPQ amendment information, and I'll move this to edit mode to show you what these fields are. And so you can see here there's an amendment start date. So by default, when you're doing an amendment, the start date is set to the current date. If not, you want to set it to a particular date, you can always fill that value here, and that would be taken as a default start date. You can also associate a price book ID for the amendment opportunity unless you wanted to use the one which was used earlier. And this is how where you can put that ID. Now, of course, you have to put the Salesforce ID itself here so that it can reference and populate it while creating the amendment opportunity. One more setting here is the amendment opportunity stage, and this is useful because sometimes what happens is when you are actually working through an amendment, you really have already gone through the full stages of negotiating a deal and contracting with the customer, right? So when you're going to an amendment opportunity, you may not want to go through the first initial stages of the opportunity sales process, primarily because they may be more about the initial discussions or identifying if there's an opportunity, whether it exists or not. Here we are talking about a closed deal, and really you may want to jump in somewhere in the middle of the sales process. So this helps set the default opportunity stage the amendment opportunity would be created in. Similarly, you can also create a separate record type. So if you want to have a separate sales process primarily for amendment, you can link it to that particular record type and make sure that your amendment opportunities are created with that particular record type ID. Again, you can set a default owner at the contract level as well. So you can look up to your user record and make sure that particular person is the owner of that amendment opportunity. There's also a checkbox here which allows you to disable amendment co-termination. Now, technically, there is no hard and fast limitation. You can actually change the end date of an amendment and make sure that the amendment covers for a longer duration than your initial contract. So what I was explaining earlier is more of a best practice and typically followed behavior. You do have the ability to change that. When you select this checkbox, you'll find that the end date is not populated by default. Otherwise, it would have been populated with the end date of the contract. And when you disable this, meaning when you select this checkbox, the end date by default would be blank. So these are a few fields which you have at your discretion where you can use and do some controls at a contract level when you're defining your amendment. So we looked at a complete process of a fairly simple amendment scenario in Salesforce CPQ. As we went through that, we saw that there are some limitations. There are some controls which you have, but we wanted to also highlight to you there are some key considerations you want to take care of when you're amending in Salesforce CPQ. So the first is the different scenarios which are supported from an amendment perspective. The first fundamental thing which an amendment process in Salesforce CPQ supports is change in quantity. That's really the key of what it's looking for when you're either increasing or decreasing a quantity of a particular SKU which you've already purchased. Similarly, the next one is change of a start date. The changing of a start date typically signifies from when does that amendment happen. So even though you've started the contract from say Jan of a particular year, you may want the change or amendment only to be effective from March. So that's where the change of start date comes in. The third point is the ability to add new products. And this again is when you already have a contract, but you want to purchase additional SKUs. It is natively supported in Salesforce CPQ. Also, you can update the pricing and discount it for these newly added products. The existing products, the pricing structure remains the same. The last point is again fundamental to any Salesforce CPQ quoting behavior, that proration is done automatically. So these are the different scenarios where amendment is supported. Of course, there are some things we need to have some workarounds. So one example is if you want to terminate a contract early, the easiest way to do that is you can zero out the products from the end date of the new end date of the contract. So as an example, you have a contract from Jan 1st to December 31st for 10 products. Now, what you want to do is terminate that contract to end on, say, November 30th. So what you would do is you would do an amendment, which is from the next day after November 30th. So that is from December 1st till December 31st, the end date of the contract. And the change you would do is you would change the quantity to 0 for all the SKUs you have. So what it in effect does is it makes that you have all the SKUs as they are till November 30th, but after that you have 0 quantity. So that's one way of terminating a contract early using the existing supported amendment scenarios. Another use case which obviously comes in is to be able to change the pricing or discount of existing quote lines. And really the workaround for that is canceling them first by making the quantity 0, very similar to the way we would have terminated the contract, and re-adding the product. And when you re-add the product, what it allows you to do, of course, is to change the pricing or discounting. So those are a couple of workarounds which are available with the currently supported amendment scenarios. Now that we went through the fundamentals of how amendment works, let's now talk about renewal. So renewal process obviously is when you've come to the end of a contract, you want to renew the contract. So you want to either extend the subscriptions as they are, or you want to add new products or change the quantities and so on. Again, this is a very inherent sales process activity where you're preparing your sales reps to talk to the customers as the renewal date comes near, and make sure that you're trying to give them the best offers and also try to be able to sell as much as possible. So the way Salesforce CPQ supports that, it allows you to create some renewal opportunities, do some renewal quoting and so on. We'll walk through how this behavior happens. But before that, let's quickly look at how the renewal process is set up in Salesforce CPQ. And first we'll start with when you are having a renewal model, which is contract based. And contract based, of course, is a scenario when you have at least one subscription product and you are trying to renew that. So again, this starts with a contracted opportunity. So when you have a contracted opportunity, what you want to do is really be able to tell Salesforce CPQ that there is a renewal which will come up as the contract ends and have it prepared for that. So for that, there is a checkbox which allows you to forecast your renewal, and you just have to select it. You can do it as soon as you have done your contracting of the original opportunity. And so what Salesforce CPQ will do is it will create a renewal opportunity with subscription products and percent of total products. The percent of total products is primarily to support the pricing perspective, where you need the original product, which is covering that percent of total product, and subscriptions obviously, because those are the ones which are getting renewed. Now, these are added as opportunity products with the existing pricing information from the original opportunity. I put a small note here that while it's actually doing that, so whenever you select the checkbox, there's a small backend process which happens in Salesforce CPQ. It'll first create the quote with the quote lines to be able to sync that to the opportunity product. So it creates a quote, allows the opportunity products to be updated with the pricing and everything, and then it goes ahead and deletes the quote. So at the end of this process, even though you may not even see it by the time you go and navigate to the renewal opportunity, what would have happened is it would have created a quote which would have then been uh, the source of information for the opportunity products tied to that opportunity, and then remove that quote. So you'll end up with a renewal opportunity with just the opportunity products at this time. Now the next step is you want to get the quote. Now for that, there is a separate checkbox called renewal quoted. Now the reason these are kept separate is very fundamental how you would do business, right? So when you're actually going to your customers to go and negotiate your renewal terms, that typically happens closer to the renewal date. So it would be closer to when your contract is expiring, maybe a month or a couple of months before that. Based on your selling cycle, you'll go and start negotiating. So you want to really have the quote generated at that time. Also, one more thing, what could have happened is once you've contracted an opportunity, through the life cycle of the usage of that particular product, they may have amendments which may have come in. So even though you have created a renewal opportunity with the original subscriptions which were there in the original opportunity, if an amendment had happened with just the current setup, it would get updated. So your latest products would come in with based on what was actually amended. And if you had actually done the renewal quoting, so if you had actually done your quoting, then it would not get updated. So ideally, the renewal quoted, or when you're actually going and quoting or adding the quote to the renewal opportunity, that should be done at the point you're ready to go ahead and discuss negotiation terms with the customer. And if there are any amendments or changes on the original contract, those should have already flown in by then. So once you are actually do the renewal quoting, a quote will be added against the renewal opportunity. And then it's really the same cycle. You are actually going ahead and updating the quote. The key difference here for a renewal quote versus an amendment quote is that the renewal quote is just like a brand new quote. You can make any changes to it. You can definitely go ahead and change the pricing or discount on any of the existing line items which were there, unlike an amendment scenario. And then you'd go ahead and contract that renewal opportunity, and which would of course have your contract created with the updated subscriptions. And if you had added any new products which were non-subscription and based on the asset conversion, you may have your assets also updated on the account. So this is how a typical renewal process works in Salesforce CPQ under the contract-based model. Let's look at the same thing from an asset-based scenario. This is of course much simpler. What would happen is you would have your assets, the percent of total assets representing the subscriptions, and at least one covered asset should be there on your account for being able to renew it. And you would go ahead and renew the assets. And what it would do is again create a renewal opportunity with the renewal quote. So again, we are not here waiting for a separate quoting or a separate forecast, because you're talking about non-subscription products here. So you directly create a renewal opportunity with the renewal quote. and then the renewal quote will have all the percent of total asset products and all the covered assets. It will start with a zero net price, and then of course you can go ahead and make changes as needed, and you can go through the typical cycle of closing out the opportunity, and then your assets will be finally updated on the account. So now, having gone through these two scenarios, let us quickly look at a contract-based example in our trialogue. Now to look at a renewal opportunity, we'll take the example of the same contract we've been working with for our amendment. So we obviously did an amendment on the original contract, so it has now two subscriptions. One of the original Apple smartwatch warranty, which was there for the full duration, and the second one which we added, which started a month later. Now, before we do the actual renewal process, let us quickly look at some of the fields which are available for us, similar to the amendment, where we can do some control over how a renewal opportunity is created. So the first field here is the renewal forecast. Now this checkbox, with that simple action, when you select this, is when you generate the renewal opportunity. It gets automatically created, and like I said, it will add the opportunity products as well. And for a very short duration, it will have the code added to make sure that the opportunity products are populated properly, and then the code will disappear. Now, there are a few other fields here which are related to defining how that opportunity is set up. So you can set up the price book ID if you want to define a different price book ID for the renewal opportunity. Similarly, the opportunity stage or the record type. And the renewal opportunity field here is a lookup to that opportunity which gets created. So this will get populated automatically based on when you select the renewal forecast. The renewal term, as you can see here, it has been set default here by 12 by looking at what is there in the original contract. So it matches that. If you want, you can change this. So sometimes you have contracts which are initially sold for 1 year, but they may be renewed for a 3-year period. So you can change this from 12 to 36 on the contract, and the renewal opportunity gets created accordingly. Similarly, the renewal owner is the opportunity owner, and you can preset who the owner should be. One more thing you can do is apply an uplift. So if you want like the pricing should increase by a particular percentage, this is where you would apply that uplift percentage, and it will automatically apply that on your quote lines when it's doing the calculation for the pricing. You also have a MDQ renewal behavior. This is for multidimensional quoting. We will cover multidimensional quoting in a separate session later on, but just to quickly explain what this is um, as part of MDQ process, you can have different quantities or prices defined for a particular quote line divided by time segments. So different segments will be created, and you can define different quantities for so on for those particular MDQ products. Now, if you have an MDQ product in your original contract and you are renewing it, you can opt without making any changes here. So by default, it would treat it as an MDQ product as part of the renewal. If you want to remove the MDQ behavior, you choose desegmented, and what that means, it will act like a standard product. Of course, when you look at the session on MDQ, you will be able to relate to this particular field better. Then also one important field here is the renewal quoted. The renewal quoted is when you're actually ready to work on the renewal opportunity and you want the code to show up against that renewal opportunity. So again, as I mentioned, this is distinct from the renewal forecast based on when you would actually create the opportunity. Now, in typical business scenarios, what we've seen in implementations is that the renewal forecast field is generally automatically selected by a workflow or a process builder based on your business needs. But of course, you can have the sales reps also manually go and select it every time a contract is generated. One more field here, which is on the section above, is the amendment and renewal behavior. So there is a field here where you can set the basis for the renewal start date or the amendment end date. So when you have subscriptions which are of having different end dates on a particular quote, so your quote lines have different durations, for example, you can define which date end date you want to use, where your renewal will start or your amendment will end. So you either pick the latest one or you pick the earliest one. So these are some controls which you have available. Let us go ahead and create a renewal opportunity by simply clicking on the renewal forecast checkbox here and saving the record. Now, as soon as I save the record, you'll see that the renewal opportunity field got populated. Now it came with the default name of renewal opportunity. You may want to have some process built in where you want to update it as the business requirement, but that's how Salesforce CPQ behaves by default. And let me quickly open that opportunity to show you how it looks like. Now, firstly, you'll see that it does not have a quote. It would have had it for a very short duration, as I keep mentioning, but that's gone away now, and you just have the single product of the Apple smartwatch warranty. And now, at the time of when the contract ended, you had 2 units of those. So you will see that there are two quantities for that Apple smartwatch warranty, which is now available for renewal. Also, the close date is typically set automatically based on the end date of the contract from which this particular opportunity was renewed. So this is available then for forecasting your pipeline reporting and so on. So you have the product, you have the opportunity all set up, and in any of your sales pipeline reports, these will show up. And of course, you can define what stage you want it to start working in, and accordingly put in the appropriate probability and weightage and so on. So let's say that you've done this and then you're nearing the date of when you're actually going to go and work on this. What you would do then is have the renewal quoted checkbox selected. Now again, this is something which you can automate if you want to do it based on the contract end date and have this selected automatically, say a month or a couple of months before. You can automate that process. But by the basis of selecting this, what you're telling Salesforce CPQ is, I'm ready to now work on my renewal opportunity. I would like to start quoting. So if I refresh the opportunity, you will see that against that particular opportunity, now I have a quote which is generated, a primary quote, and the net amount is the same because it will have the same quote lines. So let me quickly show you how the quote looks like. Let's go ahead and edit lines. And you'll see that I have my warranty again in a single line, because now it's picking up from the end of the contract, even though there were 2 units separately added because they started on different dates. At the end of the contract, we had 2 units of the smartwatch warranty. And as different from the initial amendment which we did here, we can, for example, apply some discount, and it'll allow us to do that. And that's how this works. Of course, the total is $18 based on the quantity. And I can go ahead and save this, and it'll work like any other typical quoting process we've seen in our earlier videos and examples. And if I go back to the opportunity, I can close this. And next we will contract it. So of course I'm moving in a very fast forward fashion from a typical business sales process cycle, but this is how Salesforce CPQ supports this. So if I go back to the account now and go back to our contract, you'll see that we've got a new contract now created. The new contract starts from the next day after the previous one, and it goes on for a duration of 1 year. If I click on this, you'll see that it has one subscription, and this is for the Apple smartwatch. And let me just do a view all. And if I look at some of the more details here, you can see that yes, the additional discount, of course, is also applied. So the net price to the customer is 9. So this is how a typical renewal process works. If I had added non-subscription products as well as part of renewing, those would have reflected in the assets against the account, but I just work with the subscriptions here and just renew them as is. Now, as part of renewal, there is also one more item which I wanted to show you. So if I go back to our same account, which we've been using as our example, and I look at the contracts, so I've got two contracts here. Now, many times when we're working with a new implementation, or we've just done a data load of the existing contracts into a CPQ org which we've set up, they are not always aligned and set up the way we want it to neatly work in Salesforce CPQ fashion. Obviously, if you had started out using Salesforce CPQ and done all your contracts and amendments and renewals on the tool itself, they would be all nicely connected. So Salesforce CPQ does allow you a feature to help merge, if you may, multiple contracts to be aligned into one master contract. And for that, you have a button here called Renew Contracts. Now, this button, Renew Contracts, what it allows you to do is when you have multiple contracts for an account, it allows you to select different contracts and then decide which one is the master and merge them all together. Now, when you've selected a particular contract as a master, the end date of that contract, the last date of that contract is what is inherited by all the other quote lines. So they all get aligned to that particular master contract. So that feature is available when you're having multiple disparate contracts and you want to do some more of a data cleanup when you're setting up your data in Salesforce CPQ. So one small tip to be aware of, some functionality which can be used as part of your initial implementation itself. Now there is one more feature which is very important to understand in Salesforce CPQ. It's more related to pricing, but comes into play primarily when you're contracting with the customer. So for example, if you sold a particular product to a customer at $80, and whereas the typical list price was $100, and you really want to hold that $80 price to the customer every time you're quoting to that particular customer, Salesforce CPQ offers a concept of something called contracted pricing. And that is set at the account level. So if I go back to the account, there is a particular related list called contract prices. So the contracted prices, if I click on new, you'll see I have a few information which I can fill in. So first of all, you can have this driven from the contract itself. So if a contract is the one which is driving a particular price being set for a product, that's the lookup which will get automatically populated. You could also manually associate this to a product and have a product ID here and then associate a particular price. So what this means is this would be the price you want to associate for that particular product when you're selling to this customer. And if you remember our price waterfall discussion, the contracted price is what comes in the special price, or what fills that special price field when you're looking at the different price points which are captured by Salesforce CPQ. Of course, when you're adding a price here for a product, especially when you're doing it for subscription products, take into consideration the subscription term for that particular product. So the default subscription term is 12 months. Remember that you're actually quoting for that particular 12-month time period. And you also have an associated currency, so you can have different prices being set for different currencies. You could also optionally do a discount, and the discount field is a percentage field. So you can put a percentage here on how much you want to discount. And you can also apply discount schedules, and the discount schedule here would override the discount schedule which is at the product level. So this is very specific to a particular account or a customer you're selling to. And then a few other fields like the effective date and the expiration date are more controls over when this particular contracted pricing should take into effect. So it only starts from the effective date till the expiration date. Additionally, instead of doing it at product level, you could also apply some filters. So you could say that I want anything which is a product family value of hardware. So I put product family equal to and filter value of hardware. So you could have a particular contracted pricing set for all hardware products. One small thing to note is when you're setting it up like this, do not use the price, because you will have a skew of different products which are there, and you will have different prices. Typically, the percentage discount is the one you would use when you're using the filter option to define a range of or multiple products to associate a single contracted pricing record. So while using contracted pricing, there are some important considerations you need to be aware of. A few of them we walk through, like the discount schedule, which is set on the contracted price, will override the one set at the product level. Also, as part of using contracted pricing, Salesforce CPQ will link that contracted price to the quote line where it is applied. And to do that, it does it in two ways. One, there is a lookup field called contracted price on the quote line, and this gets populated with that reference to that contracted price record. And also there's a separate field called special price type, and this field value is set to a value of contracted price, so that there's a linkage saying that on the quote line, the special price which is being shown is applied because of a contracted pricing scenario. And of course, the lookup field will show what is that particular contracted price which was applied. There are some best practices also we should take note of. A few again which we talked through is when you're setting up the price on a contracted price, take into consideration the default subscription term. You want to make sure it's in alignment with that, and the price you're quoting covers that entire term. Also, it's a best practice to set only one contracted price per product. You can technically create more than one, but it could show an error when you're actually doing your quoting. There's also a field called generate contracted price, and this is available both on the quote and the product. And what that particular field does is, if you set that field to true, if you're quoting a particular product, as soon as that quote is applied, the price on the quote will get referenced and added as a contracted price for that customer. You can also do it at a product level, so that whenever the product is used in any quote, it gets applied with a contracted price for that particular customer for which that quote is done. Now, if you do it at the quote level, when you set that generate contracted price action at the quote level, it will only work for that particular quote. Whereas if you do it at the product level, it will work across multiple quotes. So the preference is to do it at the quote level because you'll only do it once and as needed. Whereas if you do it at the product level, you may end up creating multiple contracted prices, which could again throw an error. And the third point again we talked about is, if you're using a filter to identify your products, use the discount percentage, because the price really won't make sense, especially when you have multiple products. They may have different prices, whereas a percentage is what you can apply globally. Another interesting aspect of contracted pricing is that it can be inherited through the account hierarchy. So if you're familiar with the native Salesforce so a parent account structure, so if you associate a parent account to an account and you build up that account hierarchy and you set a contracted price at a parent account level, it will cascade down through the hierarchy to its child accounts. So for example, if you have a customer which is at a regional level, and then you have the parent of that customer, the parent account set at a global level, and you set a contracted price at the global level, the regional level account will also inherit that contracted pricing when you're quoting against that regional customer. Of course, this can rise to a scenario when you have different contracted pricing set, one at the parent and one at the child. So in that scenario, when there's a conflict, the one set at a lower level will win over the one set at a higher level. Also, Salesforce CPQ gives you the option to bypass this native behavior if you set the ignore parent contracted prices checkbox at the account level. So when that is set, this cascading down of the contracted price functionality will not work for that particular account. There is yet another interesting feature which you can use related to contracted pricing is when you want to retrieve the contracted price from an alternate account. So let's say there is a separate agency or an organization which is helping manage the price for a different entity. So the point to note here is that we are not talking about a parent account and a child account defined hierarchical structure, but a completely different account in Salesforce instance. Now, to be able to retrieve the contracted price from that different account, we need to create a Salesforce CPQ special field. Now, as you know, the special field has to be specified with a very specific API name. In this case, it is contracted account ID __ C. And this field has to be created on the quote object. And the way you have to build this field from a data type perspective is that it should host the account ID of that alternate account. So you can set it up as an account lookup or even as a formula field. And when that field is populated, Salesforce CPQ will know that it has to look for a contracted price which is tied to that particular alternate account defined in that field. Now, this again is another example of where the special field comes in very handy. So if you look at it from a business use case perspective, we may have a scenario where you have an alternate account which is defining the contracted price, but it could be that particular account may need to be manually updated on the quote. So you really want a lookup field there. Or it could be a scenario where you have a logic defined based on which you can automatically define which is that alternate account. So which makes sense to have a formula field. Now, since there could be different use cases meeting the same requirement, Salesforce CPQ did not create that field by default. It has given us an option to build that field out ourselves and define the data type based on the business requirement. But the only ask being that we name it in the nomenclature which is provided per the CPQ special fields. So if we create the field in the way it is set, contracted account ID __ C, Salesforce CPQ will recognize what it needs to do and look for retrieving the contracted price from that alternate account. So these are a few things which are related to contracted pricing, which you need to take into consideration when you're using the functionality. So we had a fairly lengthy session, but we, in essence, covered just the simple scenarios of amendments, renewals, and contracted pricing. And in particular, amendments and renewals are a vast topic. There are a lot of considerations and nuances to how the functionality works. I definitely urge each of you to first practice the simple scenarios, try it out in your demo orgs, and then go through the help documentation and look at all the nuances and different combinations which Salesforce CPQ offers. But as part of this session, we wanted to make sure you get a sound foundational understanding of how these business processes are supported in Salesforce CPQ. So I hope you found this session useful and informative. Thank you so much for listening in. And thank you, ApexAS, for giving us this opportunity to present this session.